The Falcon and the Winter Soldier Season 1 is in the books. Let's talk about it, am I right? Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my review of the last, who knows with these Marvel shows these days, season of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This was a different show than WandaVision. I have not been doing these reviews each and every week like I did with WandaVision, so let this be a blanket spoiler warning because while I did not review Falcon and the Winter Soldier week by week, and I'll go into why not as we get further into the review, I have been keeping notes and little things that I wanted to mention in my review, so I've got a lot of different spoilery bits, including stuff that happened in the finale, which just aired a few hours ago as I'm taping this. So, spoiler warning overall, this is going to cover all the major plot points from The Falcon and the Winter Soldier Season 1, and I'm going to cover a lot of ground, so let's get started. First of all, the biggest question, and it's one that I got from a lot of people, is why I didn't do weekly reviews for this show. And I went into it, and I think I even said in my very first review, I reviewed the first episode and said, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do yet. And as I got into the show and started watching it, I realized that when we came to the end of the episode every single week, it wasn't quite like WandaVision, which kind of left you wondering, and there was more of a division between individual episodes. This felt very much more like a movie split into 6 different chapters, so that when we would get to the end of an episode, I certainly had some thoughts, but I made the decision as the show went not to do weekly reviews because I wanted to look at it as a whole. So I did a couple things. I did watch it weekly, but today, or I guess now yesterday, leading up to the final episode, I actually went back, started back at episode 1, and watched the whole thing through, pretty much timing it out so that I watched it as one big chunk, almost one long movie. And I have to say, it worked better for me watching it as one complete thing than it did week to week, because I think there were some tempo issues that when you're watching it all the way through don't quite stand out as much as they stand out when you're watching it week to week. We'll talk about this with these series, with the Marvel series and episode management, etc. But even more so than WandaVision, I think that this is a show that benefits from sitting and watching the entire thing down in one, because this is a lot more like a movie than a TV show. So instead of going episode by episode, because it is kind of just one long thing for me, I just kind of want to go like by elements and just kind of pick an element, break it down as we go. And I think it makes sense to start really with the first character in the title, the Falcon, Sam Wilson, and his journey throughout this show. Leading into this final episode, I was a little worried that giving Sam the shield at the end of Avengers Endgame was going to feel a bit like I'm going to use the name, I apologize, a Last Jedi moment where you end The Force Awakens with Rey holding out the lightsaber, and you start The Last Jedi with the throwing it over the shoulder, the subversion, if you will, of your expectations there. But depending on where the show went, I was worried that you were going to kind of undercut this action of Steve Rogers handing the shield over to Sam, if you know that like he almost immediately turned around and gave it away to the Smithsonian and said, you know what, that's not my shield, that's his shield. However, by the time we got to the 6th episode of this show, I understood why he did that. I think that they went into some very interesting reasons about why that happened. And most importantly, I loved his journey into ultimately taking the shield up and becoming Captain America. This was the reveal of this, the moment where he flies in, the reveal of the suit. I wish that could have been a movie theater moment. That was a theater moment for me. This is obviously, even if we were in different times, this would not have been shown in a theater. But I thought that was so well handled. I like how they set that up. I like the fact that Bucky uses his ties with Wakanda to get this suit made for him to wear as Captain America, for the Falcon to now become Captain America, because I think that sort of offsets any of the differences that people might say, like, well, he's not a super soldier, how's he going to be Captain America? You see him training, you see the fact that Sam obviously physically has a great amount of agility anyway, but also the fact that he now has this technologically advanced suit, I'm sure, akin to, probably not with exactly the same powers as they give to the Black Panther technology in Wakanda, but I'm sure a very technologically advanced suit that's going to help to even the playing field a little bit, put him a little bit maybe more on a Tony Stark Iron Man level. But the look of it is just so cool. You've incorporated the wings, the Falcon wings and everything. And I love the callback, at the beginning of the show, in the first couple episodes, they're going to see Isaiah Bradley, and the guy says, hey, it's the Black Falcon. And then in the last episode, the guy says Black Falcon, and the other guy who's filming him says, like, no, that's Captain America. That's such a great moment of just acceptance there. And I loved that. And I love the last interaction that you see where, the guy comes up to Cap. I guess I can call him Cap now, comes up to Cap and says, hey, we found the last Flag Smasher, can you help? And his response is, always. That's a great just superhero line. I know it's simple, but, I'm a sucker for the line of, at the end of Batman Begins where Commissioner Gordon says, I never thanked you. And he says, and you'll never have to. The idea of saying to a superhero, can you help? And his answer being always, I think is a great way to start Sam Wilson's journey as Captain America. Of course, the other half of the title is the Winter Soldier, aka Bucky Barnes, played by Sebastian Stan. And I also liked where we found him at the beginning of this. I mentioned that I think that Bucky has a little bit more to do with the beginning of the show, and that's because we're getting into more of the psychology behind what's going on with him. He's adrift. He's lost Steve, who was his compass, his center. And I love the conflict just starting out immediately with the fact that, he's angry at Sam for giving that shield back. And they're just kind of butting heads, and they finally have that therapy session. And Sam says, why are you so angry at me? And he says that because if Steve was wrong about you, then he was wrong about me. And you understand now why that anger is there, because he's so worried that he's going to let down his friend, even though his friend isn't around anymore, that he's going to let him down, and that maybe his friend's judgment of him, which is really the thing that brought him back from this darkness, could have been wrong. So you start off with a great character beat for Bucky in the show, and even then you revisit some moments from his past. I love that we get that little glimpse in Wakanda where we see a little bit of his reconditioning, and we also see that trust that you saw that Bucky had gotten with the Wakandans. It's betrayed a little bit on his side throughout the course of the show, but you understand where that close bond and that close connection comes to, and what he shared with them in that time that was there, and what they did for him while he was in their care. So I like that we got a little bit of glimpse of that. And then there's a great line that's actually in the finale where he's talking to Carly on the phone, and she says, haven't you ever fought for something bigger than yourself? And he says, you don't think I ever tried to fight for something bigger than myself? That's all I tried to do, and I failed twice. And that just brought me even more into the fact that nearly his entire life, all he's known is fighting for his country and fighting for Hydra. And the fact that he's now, for the first time in his life, fighting for himself. I thought that was a great way, a great piece of writing to sort of give you another clue into what's going on in his head and the struggle that he's facing on a daily basis. And I like that we now see him a little bit more at peace and a little bit more just knowing his place in the world than he was at the beginning of this show. And really for both of these characters, I think both of their arcs were very strong, and I think they have a strong dynamic. We'd seen glimpses of it before here in Civil War, but much like WandaVision, we really do get to see these two characters spend some significant time together, although not as much as I would have thought. There's not as much focus on their relationship. Really, episodes 2 and 3, and then as we go on a little bit, it's more about everything else that's going on. But I think you had a couple really great Bucky Sam scenes. The interaction that they have in the second episode about the big three, aliens, androids, and wizards. And then one of my favorite jokes actually in the MCU that I've heard for a while, when he asks how he knows about Gandalf, and Bucky says, I read The Hobbit when it came out in 1937. That's a great joke, and it harkens back to the fact that he's still this guy that's out of time and yet is kind of ahead of people on a different scale. I thought that was really well done. It is Captain America and the Winter Soldier by the end, but you don't feel like it's just because Sam's title has changed from Falcon to Captain America. It also feels like they have started to create the same kind of bond that Steve Rogers had with Bucky Barnes, and you can see that they both have made each other whole, and just the fact that they both look so at peace in that last shot before we go to credits as they're looking out at the water, you really can see how affecting this whole experience has been for them, and I look forward to seeing more of them together, maybe in future episodes of this series. That's one thing I was seeing that with the Emmys, because now that the Oscars are almost over, of course we're now going into Emmys for your consideration season, but The Falcon and the Winter Soldier was submitted as a drama series. not as a limited series. So that leads you to believe perhaps that there is more of the show, perhaps called Captain America and the Winter Soldier, coming down the line, because usually if it's a one-off series like this, then it can't be submitted in that drama category, or maybe they're just cheating and we're not going to see anymore. Who knows? One of the show's weaker points, I think, was the Flag Smashers, which was the overall villains of the show. I think they got short shrift because you're throwing so many other things in here. I think the thing that got the most short shrift was the Flag Smashers, because they really didn't get too much to mention beyond the fact that they were around during the blip, that you now have the GRC, the Global Repatriation Council, that is trying to make things back the way they were before, and they don't want to do that. And it's almost this Robin Hood type thing, steal from the rich and give to the poor. And then with Carly, Carly was very similar to Enfys Nest from Solo, A Star Wars Story, and I'm sure I'm not the only person that's made that observation, but it's doubly confusing because Aaron Kellyman played both characters, but they both seemed very similar. They both seem like antagonists, but they're ultimately working for a force for good. They come into conflict with our good guys, but it's a very conflicted kind of conflict. Now, it gets a little more black and white in Solo, A Star Wars Story as far as who's good and who's bad, but I thought it was just very interesting that they're almost like over the Disney properties are almost typecasting Aaron Kellyman in the same kind of role as this revolutionary leader who is feared by many, is behind a mask, but is ultimately working for the greater good. And it really just seemed like there was something that was missing from the storyline. And I don't know if it was something that was cut out in editing, something that was revised in the writing, or maybe it was just that it was underwritten in general. But even when you look at Mama Danya, this mythical figure who dies and is kind of the thing that motivates Carly, we never see any of that. And again, it's show don't tell. So the Flag Smashers, I think, were the ones, the one element of the show that were a little one-dimensional for my taste, and really didn't get a whole lot of fleshing out. And they also had another thing with the show that was kind of my biggest problem. Not my biggest, but something that just kind of made me go like, really? And that's the concept of super soldiers. So super soldiers obviously are a necessary thing when we're talking about Captain America, because that's where he came from. He is a super soldier. There's no other super soldiers except for him. That's the whole thing with Erskine dying, is that, they can't make any more. But then you have the Winter Soldier, you bring in Bucky, and that also kind of makes sense that, it has its roots in Hydra technology. So, Hydra would be able to make super soldiers as well. So Bucky's also a super soldier. It makes sense. He and Cap, they've got to fight each other. Then you get into Civil War, and it's the idea that actually Hydra made more super soldiers than that, but they don't really come into play because that's Zemo's whole thing, is he wants to get rid of all the super soldiers because he's so anti-hero. So you have more super soldiers, but it's more to motivate the villain's plot. And super soldiers were part of the side plot for the Incredible Hulk, because that was the origin story of the Abomination, was that he got the super soldier serum, but it wasn't about creating, it all went awry, and so you didn't really create a super soldier, you just created a monster. But here, there are 3 subplots that all rely on super soldiers. You've got John Walker, you've got the Flag Smashers, and you've got Isaiah Bradley. And super soldiers are like Skrulls for me. The fewer there are, the more interesting it is. And the more you throw in, the less that I really care. If you had asked me, I would have said, keep the super soldier storyline contained to Isaiah Bradley, because that is where I think that it worked the best, because it tied in directly to the story arc, the character arc of one of our main characters, Sam, and yet it did not require there to be 7 or 8 of them. And it also made sense why Isaiah Bradley is one, because the government, if they created the best soldier ever, it is definitely within the realm of possibility that they would have tried to recreate this, and also that they would have tried to hide it. So that wasn't really a stretch in logic. Here you had to invent this whole thing about there was a scientist who worked for Hydra, then worked for the CIA, but then he got snapped, and then he came back, and then he was hired by this, and then he made the super soldier serum for the power broker, but then they stole it from the power, and this is all of this thing to explain why you have so many super soldiers. I wish that they had come up with a different way to explain all of that away, because I don't even think really that John Walker needs to be a super soldier. I think that you could have done all of of the stuff that he does, and we'll talk about him in just a minute, but I think that you could have done all of the stuff with John Walker plot-wise, just having the mantle of Captain America without making him a super soldier, and yet it just felt like they were just, you get a serum, you get a serum, you get a serum. It was a bit too much for me. Speaking of John Walker, though, I think that Wyatt Russell did a really good job in this part, and I liked almost everything they did with him. I liked how they set him up as, the darkness sort of slowly creeps in, and I like that there are also some parallels to Steve Rogers. He's obviously a decorated American soldier. He has a partner, and I thought that the character of Battlestar Lamar was really well drawn. I liked that from the very first time you see them, Lamar is really acting as his moral compass, in much the same way that Bucky was Steve's moral compass, saying like, hey, you can't punch your way out of every problem. You can tell how much of a force for good Lamar is in John Walker's life, and why this drives him over the edge so much when he loses him. My only main criticism about his storyline would be that they seem to kind of lose that ball going into the finale, to the point where like he and Bucky and Sam are like working together at the end of the thing, and like he and Bucky are like trading wisecracks. I'm like, that dude's a psychopath. Like, no wisecracking with that guy. No jokes with that guy. You shouldn't even be around that guy. He's going to drag you down, man. Get away from him, Bucky. Now he's going to be U.S. agent. We'll see if he's a force for good or a force for evil. It seems like they kind of want us to track him going either way. But that's my only slight criticism with the character of John Walker, is that I think through the first 5 episodes, they did a great arc for him and then lost track of it a little bit at the end. But I am excited to see when and how he pops up next, because I think you could write him any number of different ways depending on when you want to go. I personally loved hating the guy, and it's nothing against Wyatt Russell. He was just a fun character to just root against and hate every single week, and maybe that's the direction they'll go. I don't know. I've mentioned the name a couple of times, but I would like to go into it a little bit deeper, because I think this is where a lot of the emotional heft for this entire series lied. But the character of Isaiah Bradley. Watching this, I think this is really the biggest beneficiary of this being a limited series and not a movie. Because I don't know if a movie would have gone into this. It definitely would not have gone into this as deeply. And part of me wonders if it would have gone into any of this at all. I like that they had the chance to do this over 2 or 3 different episodes. And the real gut punch for this, first of all, you just feel so badly for this guy that he was experimented on. And this is what I loved about what a lot of the show did. We'll talk about some of the messaging I thought was a little on the nose. This does not fall under this. This was, I think, really great use of comic book storylines to address real sins from American history, going back to the Tuskegee experiments. I mean, heinous things that happened in American history. But the idea of a soldier who was experimented upon without his knowledge and then jailed for the success of that, torn away from everybody he loved, the deep pain and the deep anguish. And you can't really overstate how great a job Carl Lumbly did. He's the actor who played Isaiah Bradley, and he just executed every single scene that he was in this series with such genuine honesty and pain. And then, of course, the scene in the Smithsonian where Sam has Isaiah recognized and has a statue erected and has his part in the Super Soldier program put into the annals of history for all time. That's just really powerful stuff. Sadly, it's wish fulfillment. More and more it's becoming reality, but it's wish fulfillment for so many actual people in history that should be recognized. But this conflict and this clash of ideologies between these two characters, but also how much they had in common, I think was one of the highlights of the show. And like I said, I also think the biggest beneficiary from doing this as a limited series, because you could have these characters meet each other 3 or 4 or 5 different times. In a movie, that would be 1 or 2 scenes, and I think it served better by spreading it out as they did on the show. The show in general really was not afraid to be of its time. There was a lot of stuff that just hits a raw nerve of exactly what is going on in society today, particularly what's going on here in the United States today. And I think that messaging worked mostly. I think there were a couple of times where it tipped a little too close to being on the nose. One of those was when John Walker in this last episode came up and said, you don't think Lamar's life mattered? The sentiment, I agree, and I understand why he was motivated by that, but I think putting it that succinctly just was a little too on the nose for me, especially when his overall storyline, I think, again, was a great way that, and comic books have been doing this for decades, of using a comic book storyline to put into images, words, pictures, etc., what's going on, because I can't think again of anything that's more relevant today than what happened to John Walker just a couple of episodes before, where you have this symbol of authority caught on camera just brutalizing somebody, and the idea of the scales dropping from people's eyes, people starting to ask questions about that authority. And comic books have been doing that for so long, bringing modern day issues into their pages, but doing it in such a way and reframing it with their characters that maybe even some people don't realize that that's what they're talking about, but it engages that discussion and brings these topics to the forefront. And so the show did this in a few different ways so masterfully that it kind of made the ones that were a little wonkier or that stuck out a little bit more, it kind of hit me a little bit harder just because it was done so well in other places. Sam's entire storyline really wraps up with this discussion he has with the GRC on the street in episode 6, which I think was a little stagey, but again, the dialogue I think was on point. And there was one line in particular, he says, "The only power that I have is that I believe that we can do better." His superpower is the belief that we can do better and wanting to show to the people, as he says, the millions of people potentially that are looking at him and just hate him for wearing what he's wearing or for having that superhero name. He's powered by that hope and that belief that we can be better than that. That's classic superhero stuff. And I love that. That's why I say I'm willing to put aside the things that didn't work as well, because the stuff that does hit so well. It's very similar to WandaVision, actually. There were things in WandaVision that didn't work for me, different sorts of things, but that I'm able to sort of compartmentalize because the stuff that does works so well. So there's a few other characters I want to mention briefly. Of course, we had the return of Zemo, and listen, Daniel Bruhl is great. It was great to see him come back as the character. We got some great moments out of it. We got the Zemo dancing 2 seconds, which turned into like its own little mini Snyder cut of dancing that Marvel went out, and they had a lot of fun with it and put out an hour-long thing of just this. I'm sure they didn't think anything of it when they were filming. So Zemo definitely generated a lot of buzz. If this were a movie, again, I don't think he'd be in it. I think you could have written around Zemo's part in this film and told a more streamlined story if you were doing this as 2 hours. But he got some good beats with Bucky. They were able to resolve some of their outstanding stuff from Winter Soldier. Generally, I'm glad that Zemo is back in the MCU. I love that they gave him the comic book mask, but it's kind of comical that he has it for like literally he puts it on once to be like, "Hello, do you remember me from the comics? Okay, let us go." That was more French than Zemo, but anyway, it doesn't matter. It really was bringing back a great actor. So it was more housekeeping than real necessary plot mechanics, but it was good to see him. We also have Sharon Carter coming back. This one I'm a little more on the fence on, just in general. We saw so little of her in the MCU. And now we have these like 2 big revelations, like, okay, she lives in the underworld. Well, you got to do what you got to do to make a living. Okay, well, she's the power broker, which means she runs the underworld. Like, okay, well, now she's a real serious customer. To then, like, she's going to come back and become an agent again, but she's going to be selling secrets and technology to the highest bidder. It was just a little bit of too much on top of too much on top of too much, added to the fact that, great action scenes. Really good action scenes. Emily Van Camp is a great actress, and Sharon Carter got some really cool things to do. But as far as her character stuff, I felt like she got so many big twists and turns thrown her way, and we know so little about her that, it left me a little bit cold, to be honest. We also have Julia Louis-Dreyfus. It was a surprise to me. I'm sure that they probably announced her casting at some point, but I try not to keep up with all of that stuff. But as the Contessa Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, not a character that I'm familiar with, and I didn't explore too much further because I do like to be surprised when and where I can. Just in general, I'm in favor of anything Julia Louis-Dreyfus related. Another comic book character that I saw a lot of references to and that we saw in the show a little bit is Joaquin Torres. He's got the Falcon wings now, and according to what I've read with the comic book storylines, perhaps he could take on that mantle now that we have a new Captain America. Danny Ramirez, who's the actor who plays Joaquin Torres, I liked what I saw of him in the show, so I'd be delighted to see more of him because I thought that he was good, in the little bit of this show that he was in. And then just overall, when we're looking at the show, I would say that about, 75 to 80% of the show really worked for me. I was very pleased with where we ended things generally, particularly with Bucky and Sam. When you look at where they started the show and where they ended the show, their individual journeys, their individual character arcs were very well done. If we're talking about rewatchability and stuff, I think the relative weakness of the Flag Smasher storyline and all of that may hurt it as far as me saying like, oh, I'm going to sit down and watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier again. But I do love where it took the characters. And so I think my major takeaway from the show is going to be that I'm really excited with what they've done with the characters, that we now have a Bucky that seems like he has really and truly moved on from his past and could become his own man, away from the Winter Soldier, away even from the Bucky Barnes that he was back in World War II, but the modern Bucky living today, obviously with Sam having reckoned with the pressures and the complicated legacy of being Captain America, is now our new Captain America. I love that Bucky called him Cap by the end of the 6th episode. I'm glad that I can now call him Cap. We have a Cap again, and I'm excited to see him in action. So generally, I think it left everybody in a really good place. And when we look at both series that we've seen so far from Marvel, they are very different series, but as far as their character arcs, as far as what they've done, particularly with their main characters, let's talk title characters most especially, Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes, Wanda and Vision. I think that both of the character arcs done on these shows have been A+. I mean, there are little things and sometimes even medium-sized things in both shows as far as how they flow, etc., that I've talked about. But I've come out of both series so immensely pleased with what they've done with these characters, how they've advanced them in the MCU. Let's say they can continue to take their characters from A to B in these shows in such a satisfying way. If they can do little things like working on the storylines, working on episode management, X number of episodes generating this much story, maybe balancing things out a little more, if they can make those improvements as well, then we could really be talking about, I think that these two series have already been something special with little caveats. We could really be talking about some outstanding television in all aspects, especially at a time when neither one of these projects were supposed to come out when they did. They were delayed, or they were bumped up, or there were movies that were delayed. The fact that they've done this well with these characters in these weird times that we've been in, I am more than willing to be patient and let them try to work out some of these little, what I think are little, kind of kinks in the system. They've started out great, and I am very happy with where we've ended both shows, very happy for the future of the MCU, and ultimately satisfied with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Looking forward to the apparently now newly retitled Captain America and the Winter Soldier, if there is going to be season 2. It seems like they went to the trouble of changing the name, so there very well may be. What did you think of the show? I know this has been a very long explanation of what I loved about the show. What did you love about the show? Let me know down in the comments below. Was there some stuff that you didn't like as much? I want to hear about that as well. Thank you so much for watching. This is a late night for me, but I'm going to be up somewhat early tomorrow because there is a movie review that will be out later today for Mortal Kombat, which is now in theaters and on HBO Max. So stay tuned later today. I will have my Mortal Kombat movie review out. And also on Sunday, the Academy Awards are happening. There will be a live after show from me right here on this channel after the Academy Awards. I'll be recapping all the winners, all the big moments, maybe the lack of big moments, and also taking your questions. So don't forget to tune in for the live Academy Awards after show on Sunday, and stay tuned for my review of Mortal Kombat, which will be here shortly. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you soon. Stay safe out there. Bye.